The sky split apart like shattered glass, scattering fragments of light across the heavens. From the rupture, a brilliant figure descended. A woman draped in flowing silver robes, her long hair glistening with a celestial glow. Her golden eyes, once radiant with divinity, dimmed as she plummeted toward the world below. A deafening impact shook the land as she crashed into an ancient forest. Trees bent and shattered, the earth trembled, and a pulse of energy rippled outward. Silence followed. The wind hesitated, as if holding its breath. In the aftermath, the woman lay still in the heart of a crater, her form barely stirring. The glow around her flickered, unstable. She was not dead, but something vital had been stripped from her. Power, purpose, memory. Rustling leaves and hesitant footsteps broke the silence. A lone figure, a young man with dark hair and wary eyes, stepped cautiously toward the crater. His clothes were worn, his boots muddied from travel. He had seen the sky burn, and despite every rational instinct telling him to run, he had come to investigate. The woman stirred. Her golden eyes fluttered open, locking onto his gaze. A moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. "You're not human, are you?" the young man murmured, taking a step closer. The woman tried to speak, but no words came. A look of realization and dread crossed her face. Her voice, her divine essence, was gone. The young man hesitated before kneeling beside her. "You're hurt," he observed. He wasn't sure why he cared. Something about her presence compelled him, as though she didn't belong to this world, yet was now bound to it. A sharp rustle in the distance snapped his attention away. Shadows moved between the trees, watching, approaching. "Who's there?" he called, his voice firm but uneasy. He reached for the dagger at his belt. The woman's fingers tightened into the dirt as she tried to rise. Danger was closing in, and she knew, without understanding how, that they had come for her. The hunt had begun. The wind howled through the trees as the first figure emerged from the darkness. Cloaked in tattered robes, its face obscured by a mask of polished bone, it moved with unnatural fluidity. More figures followed, stepping into the moonlight, silent and watchful. The young man tensed, gripping his dagger. "Who are you?" he demanded, though he knew better than to expect an answer. The woman struggled to stand, her legs weak beneath her. Despite her fallen state, something in her still radiated an unearthly presence. The masked figures hesitated as if uncertain, then one lifted a hand. A pulse of energy shot forward, aimed directly at her. Without thinking, the young man lunged. He pulled her to the ground as the blast struck the earth where she had been standing. Dirt and debris exploded around them. A sharp ringing filled his ears. He barely had time to recover before another figure advanced, drawing a curved blade that gleamed under the moonlight. They weren't just here to capture her. They were here to kill her. The woman's fingers dug into the soil, her expression tight with concentration. A faint glow shimmered around her hands, flickering like a dying ember. Power weak, barely graspable, but still there. She focused, willing it to ignite. The young man shifted into a defensive stance. "If you can fight, now would be a good time." She met his gaze, and for the first time since her fall, something sparked in her golden eyes, determination. Then, with a breath that sent the air trembling, she unleashed the remnants of her divine power. A burst of light radiated from the woman's hands, washing over the clearing like a wave of pure energy. The masked figures recoiled, shielding themselves as the golden glow crackled in the air. Though her power was faint, it still carried the weight of something divine. The young man felt the pressure of her energy pulse against his skin. It wasn't just light, it was something more, something ancient. He watched as the closest attacker faltered, its mask cracking slightly from the force. She exhaled sharply, stumbling. Whatever strength she had drawn upon had already begun to fade. The glow around her flickered, threatening to extinguish. The masked figures, momentarily stunned, regrouped. One of them raised a staff, the tip glowing with dark energy. Another lunged, blade aimed at the woman's heart. The young man moved without thinking. He caught the attacker's wrist, twisting it violently. The masked figure let out a sharp, inhuman screech as its weapon clattered to the ground. Seizing the moment, the woman thrust her palm forward, sending a final flicker of divine energy into the enemy's chest. A flash of light. The figure crumpled, unmoving. The remaining pursuers hesitated. Then, as if responding to an unheard command, they withdrew into the darkness, vanishing as swiftly as they had appeared. The woman collapsed to her knees, breath ragged. The young man sheathed his dagger, scanning the woods. "They'll be back," he muttered. She nodded weakly. She knew it too. He looked down at her. "I don't know who you are or what they want with you, but you can't stay here." She lifted her gaze to his, golden eyes filled with exhaustion and gratitude. He extended a hand. "Come with me." She hesitated for only a moment before placing her hand in his. Their fates were now intertwined. The night stretched endlessly as they moved through the dense forest. The woman leaned against the young man for support, her steps unsteady. Each breath she took felt heavier, the last remnants of her power flickering like a dying flame. "We need shelter," he muttered, glancing around. "Somewhere safe." The woman's eyes lifted to the sky, dark, unfamiliar, devoid of the constellations she once knew. She clutched at the fabric of her robe. She had fallen far, too far. A ruined temple loomed ahead, swallowed by vines and time. The young man guided her inside, brushing dust from the stone floor. "Rest here," he said, lowering her onto a broken pedestal. She watched him, sensing the quiet weight of his presence. He was not like the others of this world. There was something different. "What's your name?" he asked, voice softened. For a long moment, she was silent. Then, in a whisper that barely reached the air, she said, "I don't remember." He frowned but didn't press her. "Then I'll call you something until you do." She met his gaze, searching. "What will you call me?" He considered, then nodded as if deciding something. "Astra. A name. A new beginning." But outside the temple, in the shadows of the trees, unseen eyes still watched. The hunt was far from over. The morning light filtered weakly through the cracks in the temple's stone walls. Astra sat on the stone pedestal, her fingers tracing the carvings on the ancient stone beneath her. The air felt different here, thicker, as if it carried whispers of forgotten times, lingering on the edge of her consciousness. The young man, still unnamed in her mind, moved through the temple, searching for supplies. He had been kind to her, though she could sense the wariness beneath his actions. He did not trust easily, but then again, who could blame him? A divine being falling from the sky with no memory and only the faintest trace of power left. It was an impossible situation, one that neither of them truly understood. "I found some water," the young man said, returning with a cracked clay bowl. "It's not much, but it's something." Astra accepted it with a nod of thanks, her hands shaking slightly as she held the bowl to her lips. The water felt cool and refreshing, and for a moment, it gave her a sense of peace, a fleeting illusion of normalcy. But even as the liquid slid down her throat, she knew it wasn't enough. She needed more than just sustenance. She needed to remember. The young man watched her closely, his eyes narrowing. He had questions about who she was, what she had been, and why she had fallen. But there was something else in his eyes as well. Something protective, as if he had taken it upon himself to shield her from whatever danger lurked beyond the ruins. Astra set the bowl aside. "Where are we going next?" His expression darkened. "We can't stay here. They'll come for you again." Astra nodded. The thought of being hunted, of having no memory of her past, was a nightmare she couldn't escape. "I don't know why they're after me," she admitted, her voice soft, broken. "But I need to find out. And I'll help you," the young man said, the weight of his words heavy in the air. "I don't know what you are, Astra, but I can't leave you to face this alone." The sincerity in his voice surprised her. Astra had always been surrounded by divine beings, powerful and distant, but never like this. never with someone willing to fight beside her without question. "You don't even know my name," she said, her tone almost teasing. "How can you trust me?" He met her gaze, and for a brief moment, the air between them shifted. "I know enough." Astra could only stare at him, her heart fluttering for reasons she couldn't explain. She was lost, a goddess without a purpose, a shadow of the divine. But in this fleeting moment, with this young man beside her, she felt something stirring inside, a flicker of hope. But the moment passed, and the hunt was still out there. The wind outside began to stir. The leaves rustled, and in the distance, something moved. "They're coming," the young man said, his voice suddenly cold, alert. Astra stood, her body still weak but determined. The light around her flickered, the last remnants of her power trying to awaken. The hunt had not ended. It had only begun. The temple's once silent air was now thick with the tension of the approaching danger. Astra's power was fading fast, and the young man could sense that this was the moment when everything would change. He had been protecting her all this time, but now the roles had reversed. Outside, the wind howled like a beast on the prowl. The trees swayed violently, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The masked figures were drawing closer, their presence undeniable. Astra stood at the entrance of the ruined temple, her silver robes billowing as she gazed out at the storm approaching. Her golden eyes flickered with the last remnants of divine light. She knew it was only a matter of time before she would be forced to face her past, and whatever it was that had followed her from the sky. "I don't know how much longer I can hold them off," the young man said, his voice strained with urgency. He glanced at Astra, his brow furrowed in concern. "If we stay here, we'll be cornered." "I know," Astra replied softly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "But we don't need to run anymore." She turned to him, her expression resolute. "I've been running from my past, my identity, my purpose, but now I remember." The young man was startled. "What do you mean?" Astra closed her eyes, feeling the pulse of power deep within her, something that had been dormant for so long, waiting to be awakened. "I am a goddess, yes, but I am also someone who has fallen, not just from the sky, but from everything I once knew. I've lost my divine essence, but not my will." A soft glow surrounded her hands as she stepped forward, taking the young man's hand. "I may have forgotten who I was, but now I know what I must do." Before he could ask another question, she lifted her hands to the sky, her golden eyes shining like the sun breaking through dark clouds. The masked figures emerged from the shadows, their eerie forms cloaked in darkness. But Astra's light began to grow brighter, pushing back the gloom that had enveloped her. She stepped forward, her steps unshakable. "You came for me," she said, her voice unwavering. "But you've forgotten what I was capable of." The figures hesitated, unsure of what was happening. Astra's divine aura surged, brighter and more forceful than before. The energy that had been dormant for so long was now a roaring river, unstoppable and fierce. It was not just the divine power that had left her. It was the strength within herself that she had forgotten. In a single blinding flash, the light enveloped the masked figures, consuming them in its brilliance. When the light faded, the forest was silent. The young man stood beside Astra, his hand still in hers. The masked figures were gone, vanquished by the very power she had feared to confront. But it wasn't just her divine light that had defeated them. It was her acceptance of who she was, both the goddess and the fallen, the light and the darkness within her. She turned to the young man, her golden eyes now filled with a quiet strength. "You stayed with me, even when you didn't know who I was. And for that, I'll never forget you." He gave her a small, knowing smile. "You don't need to thank me." She nodded, finally at peace. "I may have fallen from the sky, but I found my place on the ground." As the two of them stood together, the first rays of dawn began to break through the trees. A new day had come, and with it, a new beginning for Astra. The hunt was over. And in that moment, Astra realized she didn't need to remember who she had been, because in the end, she had become who she needed to be.